Okay. I saw you somewhere. How you doing?
I didn't leave. No.
Yeah.
Doing good.
Been a long time.
Yes.
Yeah.
Good
Things
to
are
be
well?
here. Yes. Very good. Good to know.
I think the first thing to do is, if you're set up in the sun, is to get your canvas off, the sun off the canvas. And if you were here when I was setting it, you could see the sun coming through the canvas a little bit. So you have to turn it just right so that you don't get any sun on it. And the next thing is to decide what you're going to paint.
Sorry, she got lost.
What's going to be the focus.
Hello.
And what got you to this spot. So, after you've decided that, if you've chosen the landscape to be the painting, then it would probably be a good idea to start with the landscape first and the sky second. If we had a very dramatic sky, a lot of clouds, sunlight in and out and all that, maybe do the sky first. So there's not any one exact way to do outdoor painting. Alright, so one of these days, just taunt you all the time. It's kind of neat. One day. Right, so then the procedure is, right, now what do you do first? Right. Now this, I would recommend that we all come out with a canvas that's toned with something. This is a sunlight tone, and it's going to really help out later on. When you've done it enough times, and you've painted in the same location a lot, the advantage is that the sun is predictable and you know where it's going to go. So to help yourself out, you can tone your canvas accordingly. If we were to come here at 5:30 in the morning and you can see a lot of color in the sky, then it would make sense to have a very dark canvas. Because then when you put the color of the sky down, you'll see it immediately. If you have a white canvas and you come out at 5:30 in the morning, you'll be massing in the shadow and Alright, so we have a sunlit tone, so I'm going to start with the shadow first. And what's very interesting is if you squint your eyes, as always, whether we're doing a portrait or a still life or whatever we're painting, as soon as you squint, it really eliminates a lot of the details, and it helps in the massing of the picture. So, in squinting, you see the shadow shapes quite clearly in back of the pond. You see what's left of the shadow on the hemlock trees, what's left of the hemlock trees. Right, and then you can see some of the shadows that are left from the bushes onto the grasses, and the very nice reflection of the, can't leave that out, of the water, the sky. Alright, so now the question is, how dark is that shadow back there? So since we're always looking through atmosphere and it's always different every day, we have an idea where it is. But what can really help is to look at something that's immediately in the foreground. For instance, that tree trunk. Or if you squint down tight, what's left of some of the dark shadows in the bushes. And from experience and from someone telling me when I was first starting a long time ago, if you take the color red, if you took a black and white picture of that color red, it's going to appear very dark. Red is a shadow value. So if we took that red, for argument's sake, an in-between red, the red medium, and we put a spot in the foreground, like that, and then we mixed a gray so that it's very close to that value. That tells us that the shadows in the front, value-wise, and if we stick with this scale, it's going to really help us out going back. It gives us something to judge. So now if we looked at that tree, or looked at these shadows here, and then compared it to the shadows out there, almost the same. My experience is saying that it's just a little bit lighter. And one way you could judge that if we were to look this way. You can see the shadows of the trees. So you know there's a certain amount of haze in the air. If it were crystal clear, without the moisture evaporating, that shadow would be quite a bit darker. So we know that from this tree to those trees to the shadow way across the field, a little bit lighter. And if we had to guess at the colors, I mean, it's not, even though the trees are turning, you know, the shadows, they're not green, they're not red. If we just start out with an average of atmospheric gray that we look through, and whatever illuminates the shadow, put that in the shadow as well. And what illuminates the shadow is the blue sky. Because the sun can't get into the shadow. And everything has to be illuminated by something. Right? Like that. So that might be a place to start. Have a good rag handy, because in the beginning you can sketch and paint at the same time. Squinting. Squint hard enough, that reflection is about the same. Continue with the shadow, coming closer. Some of the bushes on this side of the pond now. And there's some of the shadows from these things. This is a lot for one sketch. I normally don't try and get this much in. But I think for the lesson today, also notice that the cast shadows on the ground are, generally speaking, a little bit lighter than the upright planes. They get more direct illumination from the sky. So if you look at the cast shadows on the grass there in the orchard, and then compare it to the shadows of the weeds, you can see that it's just a little bit lighter. So we move up one step. Because it's a very clear day, at least for the time being, keep it on the blue side. And the cast shadows in here, same value, but I'm going to put just a little of the local color into it, just to help some of the confusion.
Excuse me.
Now, since we have this tone, it would probably make some sense to do the sky next.
Why does having that tone make sense to do the sky?
You know. Sorry, the reason is that when you do get the sky in here, this tone will look like sunlight. Okay. So that if to come down from the sky, it's a great lesson to study values and progression of the color. If we're looking straight up, you can see how dark the sky is. And it just gets lighter, lighter and lighter. Sometimes if we just look out, we don't see it. We don't see the progression. But if you check yourself every once in a while, just kind of look up and then come down, right? You see that all getting lighter. So if our canvas, I mean, if it's out of our vision, but if we were to paint something a little strange, we could start with, and again for the, just for the lesson today, we could start with something ultramarine in the sky. All right, that's this part of the sky is the reddest part of the sky, the most violet part. And ultramarine has more red in it than any of the other blues. Right? So, and if we did that simplistically, right, if this is the Earth, right, and our atmosphere is out here, and we're painting right here, standing on top of the world. When we look up, and then when we look out, see that the distance is shorter here than it is there. So we get more of the blackness of the outer space, and then when the sun comes through and hits this veil of atmosphere, which is made up of moisture, dust, pollution, and when it refracts, when it hits that, it works just as if we're standing late in the afternoon and the sun's low in the sky and there's a shower that comes across and you see that rainbow. And what causes the rainbow is the sun going through all those particles at the right angle, and it refracts into the prism. So it's the same thing here. It's as if the sun's going through a gigantic raindrop. And so you can't help it, but as soon as you wake up in the morning and you open your eyes, you're automatically looking prismatically. And we have no choice. I'm not talking about turning the light switch on and all that stuff. I mean natural light. So, with that, ultramarine at the top, as it comes down, and down, and down, and down, and down, it gets to a point where it gains yellow. And that sunlight trapped in all that atmosphere, and the more air we look through, the lighter the sky gets, right? And then into something a little more cobalt blue, and then we start getting into the zone of our vision, right? If you make a little square like that and you look through it, that's generally what you're looking at, right? So at the top, and it's certainly a lot of judgment. I mean, if we're looking this way, it's going to be a lot lighter. If we're looking that way, wow, the sky's really dark. Dark blue sky. Right? And this way, it's getting lighter. Now all in here. Right? Now there are the haze and all that stuff.
John, I have a question. How dark would be the darkest value you'd make a clear blue sky?
Depends on where you're looking. You look this way. You know, like I was just saying, it's going to be a little bit lighter. If you look this way, it's going to be darker. If you look that, even though it's all... Thank goodness you can't pinpoint everything. All right? You can't. It's too hard to judge it. And then it's going to change all. You know, next day, tomorrow it's going to be a little bit different. So
if it looks too dark, it's too dark.
you'll know it. Or maybe you won't. I don't know.
I've seen some dark blue skies
Yeah.
that look weird.
Oh, I've seen them too. And if you're in a valley and you're looking up, dark.
That's true.
Really dark. Clear day, go out west.
Huh.
White Cat Mountain, you look up at it.
Wow.
Dark. Tell me. So, you don't want to stand here 20 minutes watching me paint a clear sky. So, the clouds seem to be increasing. only going to help the painting. It makes it more interesting. All right, now we want the sky to progress this way as well as it goes down this way. All right, so towards the sun, gain a little yellow and a little lighter value. So if we put something like manganese blue, you're going to speck a yellow into it. Speck. All right. So we get the sky going that way, getting lighter, less yellow off here. You know, if we keep going this way and this way and this way, boy, it just gets more cobalty blue out there. All right, and then as it comes down towards the trees, down here, you see just a hint of some of that. They call those mare's tails. 24 hours rain. Right, for the forecast.
Yeah. Remember the count is always 24 hours.
Right, now anything in the sunlight is going to have a little warmth in it. So there'll be some color in here, a little bit of the warmth. And sometimes it's just so subtle that, you know, because we're all painters, we know it's there. But it's, and I'm sure you've all experienced it too, and you know, people that have really never picked up a brush, and they look at it and say, how did you do that? So, but we also know too that if you don't put it in, it's going to be lacking. It's going to be lacking the life, which is our whole purpose in painting, to recreate life on our canvas. And all the beauties and emotions that stir the human soul. And as the years go on, we tend to paint seemingly a little bit less. But you think more. So that when you do paint, you have all those years behind you of lessons. You leave the house when it's dark, and you go out and paint all day and come home when it's dark. Those are the years that you have behind you, and that affords us the opportunity to think. We're not constantly, what color is that? You've managed a lot of that. That sometimes you can sit in front of a canvas in the studio, which is a different type of painting than painting on location. because you're thinking a little bit more of what you're trying to do, so that you could conceivably sit in front of a canvas for a larger portion of the day and end up painting it in a very short amount of time, because you're thinking of it. You have the idea, and you're systematically and in a methodical way plotting your way through that canvas, so that the actual procedure isn't as long, doesn't take as long as the conception. And that's what studio painting is about. Outside here is our lessons, and we try and paint pretty much what's in front of us. Alright, so getting back to what you were saying, Shulit, now, once the sky is in and you have it placed next to your tone, if the canvas were white or if it were orange or red or something, then it would be a little bit more difficult to see it. But when it's a neutral tone, you can see that the sunlight, you can see your pattern, your light and shadow pattern easier. Reflection progress just like the sky. And now it's got some clouds in it. And I remember when we first set up here, that was really blue. What's left? Now, a point here, it's kind of a confusing point, but if you painted ponds in water often, you'll know that when there's no wind at all, everything reflects just like a mirror. Now you see some of the blue out there on the water, and you wonder what's going on, but really that's the pond scum. And it's a beautiful thing to paint. It doesn't sound as nice as it really is. But sometimes you get sunlight on it. There's a reflection of the sky. Because what it's doing is it's blocking out the reflection of the trees. And because it's wet, it's picking up some of the sky. Right now, I think what's left is the sunlight. We have our scale at the middle. From the middle of our scale upward is all the sunlight values. The one thing that helps us in the fall is that the different colored trees separate themselves so that you can see the layers easier, and you can see the individual trees easier than if we're in the middle of the summer and everything is green on green on green on green. Most difficult. The difficult thing about the fall is that you have to try and mix those colors and keep them relatively at the same value. So the yellow trees and the orange trees and the red trees and the green trees that haven't turned yet, you know, value-wise, they're still fairly close. You get a bright yellow maple tree, of course it's going to be a little bit lighter. So once again, that word judgment. So you can see this average is very close to the tone that I have. Really does make life a little easier. Right, and then for some of the trees that have turned through to add just straight orange, it's going to be intense, but the value is going to be dark. So that certain amount of white some of the trees that haven't turned yet are on the way, not quite as red or yellow. Flat planes, just like the shadow, are a little bit lighter. And the longer the day goes, the shorter the shadows. The sun, as we were talking before, is getting up overhead, so it's getting closer and closer to the earth. And consequently it bleaches out some of the color, so it's not quite as intense a green as it was a couple hours ago.
John, are you adding gray to that or just white?
Right.
It's a light gray.
The other thing too, it's important to get your shadow statement down first. Because the shadows are getting shorter and shorter, the sun's coming around. So at least by getting your shadow down and your tone, you have your design set. Okay, if we look at the grass here, we look at the grass there, and then the next field, and then the next one, you can see, the grayness as it goes off. What was so interesting is that the value stays the same in the sunlight. So as green as this is, adding more gray to it, going back. But the value is the same, just getting gray or going off. And that's very deceiving when you first start painting. And I have to say that a lot of painters don't know it. And they're very quick to say that everything gets lighter going off into the distance. Well, ultimately. But for the most part, the sunlight stays the same going back. It doesn't get lighter. It doesn't get darker. It's the shadows that get lighter and lighter and lighter and lighter. The shadow, like we talked about before. Until the shadows get so light that they come up to the sunlight value. So you can see a little bit of that mountain way in the back. Right? Now if you squint your eyes, the sunlight on those trees is darn close to the value of that mountain. So that's telling you that the shadows have gotten so light that you don't see them anymore. And it's what we call the neutralization point, where the shadows and the sunlight become the same. And all you get are that blue-gray, sometimes purpley mountain in the distance. Isn't that interesting? I never believed it for the longest time. It's really true. See the sunlight. Come up lighter on the flat plains and the weeds and all that stuff along the edge here. I'm going to move a little bit quicker so that we can get painting. Taking up all the time here. Right. Because the field is on that side of the sun, it's a little grayer than the grass here. See it? Right. Same grass, just different angle of the sun. Right. The pine trees, slightly darker, still in the sunlight.
John, are there halftones in this?
If you do it,
Like in the distance, or at
Yeah.
what point do you judge how much?
when you can see sunlight and shadow, if you can see that contrast, then you know there's going to be a halftone. Just haven't gotten to it yet. But when you can't see sunlight and shadow, when it's that far back, like that hill way in the distance, obviously there isn't a halftone there. Now you get the halftone in the foreground. Good. It's just gets turned. But is it far enough back there that you see another value at the top of the halftone? Sometimes you can do that just by manipulating the brush. Certainly in here, this tree, you can actually see the sky planes on the shadow side. Right, so you're getting at least 5 values in the shadow here, and probably on the light side at least 3. Right, maybe not the full scale, but get these the bushes in. All this stuff here. once the leaves fall and it's in the foreground many times, and as we start approaching mid-morning, a little bit silvery. Sunlight. Bushes back out here. So when I'm putting that in, I'm actually half toning into it to get that triad. Alright, and once you get that triad, at least you get the form. And then as time goes on, you start to work some of that in there better. Few more values. Alright, and then to reinstate some of the shadow, a greener sunlight on the grass. Pull the foreground out.
Is that more green and less gray?
Absolutely. To the point where it's almost all green. You work a little gray into it. Versus in the distance, it's more gray than green. And how blue does that gray look? Right? So when you say that, gee, in the sunlight, it almost looks like there's blue in the sunlight. I don't understand. But if you get some of that silvery gray atmosphere sitting in it, it'll be cool enough. You try and keep the brushes separated, but that gets all... Some darker values in the foreground. And what would be really neat is to play around with this reflection next to the water. Gently. And then lastly, the local color into the shadow. Alright, we know there's blue in it, but it's not completely blue. Work some of the local color into it. But like we were talking about before, every day is a little different. So as to how much atmosphere is in that shadow, every one of us is going to do it a little bit differently.
What about that little red dot that you started out with?
Oh,
You gonna take it out?
cardinal. Okay. But that's your key. That whole thing, I was going to go back to that
Right,
later.
that's what I was-
That's your key to the shadow, right? That little red spot. Right now, the same thing back in here. I'm not going to do it now, but you know, you decide as to how much color goes into it. You look at it, not much. You don't even include those pine trees in here, but boy, that's as blue-gray shadow as you're going to get. And then you see the shadow way across the field. So you start judging things. You're looking around, you see the shadows on this maple tree. Right, you see a lot of green in there. from that green going back there. I mean, if you look at this maple tree, the shadow in that, just for a few seconds, just keep looking at it. And then you glance over and you look at the shadow way across the pond. Wow. That's all here. Only thing is you may, oops. You might just indicate where the shoreline is. It's probably better with that. We should probably paint.
Thank you, John. Hi.
I remember it's a full day. So.
I know.
Morning.
Oh, hi. How are you?